It's wonderful to be here at UNAM at Museo Universitario del Chopo. Mauricio has provided a marvelous catalytic spark for our conversation for this extraordinary series. He said in an email priming the pump for our discussion that he had been thinking about Theodor Adorno's famous and controversial assertion to write poetry after Auschwitz is barbaric. And this corrodes even the knowledge of why it has become impossible to write poetry today. And Mauricio wonders, how will we write not only poetry, but also fiction, science fictional plague of COVID-19? What are the responsibilities of writers, of we as writers, in the face of the global disaster that the pandemic has wrought? And do we come to grips with that in grassroots political activism or on the page in imaginary worlds? I'm going to be uncharacteristically contrarian and play devil's advocate. And I will say that it seems to me that poetry, and especially speculative fiction, which Naief is well versed in, is more necessary than ever. And J.G. Ballard, the British author of speculative fiction, to my mind, is our Virgil leading our way into cognitive cartography in this moment. He said in his introduction to the 1974 French edition of Crash, "We live in a world ruled by fictions of every kind, mass merchandising, advertising, politics conducted as a branch of advertising, the instant translation of science and technology into popular imagery, the increasing blurring and intermingling of identities within the realm of consumer goods, which we certainly see on social media and in conspiracy theories like QAnon, the prompting of any free or original imaginative response to experience by the television screen. We live inside an enormous novel. For the writer in particular, it is less and less necessary for him to invent the fictional content of his novel. The fiction is already there. The writer's task is to invent the reality. To both of you as novelists, do you say amen to that sermon, or are you utterly unpersuaded by Ballard's perspective? Do we in fact live in a surrealist novel? Is the world more science fictional by the minute? And is it our job as writers to conjure a sane alternative? Or does the surreality, the novelistic, the fabulistic, the magical realist nature of everyday reality dispossess us of our basic imaginative tools and leave us completely bewildered as creative intellects? Either one of you dive in.
Well, I tend to agree with J.G. Ballard. And as soon as you gave us, as you remind us of that quote on the prologue or introduction of his great novel Crash, I went to reread that introduction. And yes, I think I agree with another colleague of us, another writer, who said some years ago that Ballard started as a kind of futuristic, as a kind of a prophet, and then turned into the best chronicle of our present. And I agree with that assertion by this Argentinian author. And yes, I think that we're now facing so much fiction in our everyday lives. I mean, the COVID-19 pandemic is all science fiction. It's like a science fiction novel from not very good writer, I must say, because it's absurd, it's full of gaps, it's full of holes, it lacks continuity, it lacks human depth somehow, and we as writers have to reinvent, not only invent, but reinvent our reality. At the start of this bad clumsy science fiction novel that we're living in, March 2020, I started to think, what was I going to do as a writer, facing the global cataclysmic landscape that we were facing, that we are facing, that we are still facing. So what I did to answer my own question was to do the best thing, or at least one of the best things that I do, that is to write, to start writing. Um, what I wrote, the first of 3 or 4 books that I wrote during 2020, was a short novel that I haven't intended to write in any stage of my life, that suddenly came to me like a bolt on lightning from the inspirational sky, if, if you can say that. And it is a novel that doesn't have to do, a short novel, or novel, that doesn't have to do exactly with COVID-19, because I think that we have to, let the present coalesce and make a sediment in ourselves before starting writing about our present. I always think that the novels that address the immediate present tend to be bad novels, because reality needs to be sedimented in the author. So what I wrote was a novel that had to do with, obviously, death, and the death landscape that I am, with all the rest of the world, was living and experimenting day after day, hour after hour. And that was at least my first step to face the new reality, or the new normality. I will call it the new abnormality that we're going to face from here to eternity, because COVID-19 has turned the history of mankind into two, has slashed the history of humankind in 2 hemispheres. Mm-hmm. That was before COVID and after COVID, like BC and AC.
And what was, for our listeners, what was the title of the novel?
The title of the novel is The Funeral, and I will not take much time talking about this, but it has to do, it's a funny thing that happened with this novel, because about 2 years ago, I was a reader of mine, an Instagram reader, emailed me telling me that she had acquired, she's a Mexican woman living in Italy, in Turin, and married to an Italian man, and that she got to buy a whole album of old pictures of a funeral. In some part of Italy, maybe according to the attires and the automobiles that you can see in some of the pictures, I guess it's from the 1950s, in the 1950s. So I was like, yes, I'm interested in getting this album, this photo album, and doing something with it. But as I said before, the work of the writer needs to be sedimented. The present of the writer needs to be sedimented. So it got me 2 years to start writing something, starting from these pictures, or basing what I wanted to write in these pictures. And it was an incredible, really fulfilling experience, one of the most satisfying, I must say, in my writing career, because I got into, well, what us fiction writers do, got into another people's story, but these people actually existed. Somewhere in Italy, somewhere during the 1950s. So I got the opportunity to reinvent the life and death of some of these characters that appeared I selected, it was a photo album comprised of maybe 50 pictures. I selected like maybe 25, 30, and I decided to tell the story behind each one of the pictures. So that's The Funeral.
It sounds like the photo album in question was T.S. Eliot's objective correlative to your inner emotional life. You found a symbol, an outward world that was almost allegorical or a surrealist metaphor for the COVID pandemic.
Absolutely, because actually what it's quite darkly ironic, were mostly banned around the world. So this whole procession made during the 1950s somewhere in Italy was like actually a thing from the past. And actually I was starting to think that funerals, as we get to know them, you know, being at a funeral parlor or being in a procession in this small Italian town, were a thing of the past. I hope that in the future we will be able to regain this, for me, necessary contact with our death.
It's quite odd to think about the death of death, you know, at the
Yeah.
risk of sounding like a daily affirmation or a decoupage plaque mission statement. You know, wow, that's profound. But there is something odd about the notion of funeral processions and graveside rituals expiring, and it's also doubly odd that this scrapbook, which is a virtual book of the dead, comes washing up on your shore at just the right moment, you know,
Yeah.
for you to transform it, or as Freud would say, cathect it with psychic energy. Naief, the same question to you, whether as a novelist or a cultural critic, and certainly as a spelunker in the nethermost depths of the science fiction imaginary, does this surrealistic nature of the moment we live in, Ballard's proverbial enormous novel that we're all now inhabiting, right, living this surreality, does that dispossess you of the ability to imagine liberatory or transgressive or repressive fantasies? Does it steal the words right out of your mouth, in the sense that any dystopia you might conjure is going to pale in comparison to the multifactorial or hydra-headed horror of our moment? I mean, we've got Trump, we've got the QAnon shaman, you know, howling in the Senate chamber as if he's going to smear the walls with his feces. You've got Oathkeeper militiamen thundering through the Capitol, howling for Mike Pence's head and threatening to string up Nancy Pelosi. And they came within, you know, a minute or two of doing so. It's not pretty to imagine what would have happened if these white supremacists had gotten their hands on Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez or Montiel Jones or any black or brown member of our Congress. So, and then you've got the air is thick with conspiracy theory. You've got a pandemic straight out of the Andromeda strain, you know, or Day of the Triffids, or, you know, pick your dystopian viral horror. You know, Richard Preston's The Hot Zone is written like a science fiction novel. So you can invert these things, sci-fi that reads as sober scientific prognostication, or science fiction or scientific speculation that reads as SF. So for you, is this the moment you were born to inhabit, or are you experiencing a kind of a peculiar epistemological vertigo because reality is more fictional than the fiction you write?
Wow. Very, very loaded, incredibly loaded. Anyway, just first, thank you, Pacho, for having us here. This is such a privilege. This is always such an amazing thing to be back in my university, my alma mater. And just saying this also because I need more time to digest every single word that you said, Mark, which is so complicated to express for me. Because as you say, yes, for me, first of all, the reading a Ballard for me was transformative, was the most influential thing that happened in my literary life. I mean, he made me a writer. He's the one who really gave me the need to say things, and Still Crash for me is probably my favorite book. and living through this moment is exactly as you say. It's on one side intoxicating and fantastic, terrorizing. I mean, just taken from the point of view of the writer, of somebody who has to do something with your reality and turn it into literature, express something of value out of all this human experience and human misery. It's a terrifying feeling for me. And I think we had a conversation a while ago when I was telling you that I had been writing this book of short stories about the apocalypse, about different kind of apocalypses. So these are number of short stories telling different ways in which something is going to end. I mean, so I have the end of the water, the end of sex, the end of love, the end of relationships, the end of gender. So I was having fun with this, and I worked with this for a long time. I believe it's maybe between the first one and the last one, probably there are 7 years, the 7 years apart. And then suddenly this happens. So on one hand, you don't even know if this is the merchandise opportunity of your life, or this is the end of your career. What is it? I don't know. And I feel like that because for me, the pandemic has been on one hand a free fall, this free fall into a dystopia, and on the other side, this slow grinding of the machinery into this way of stopping. And I really like that Mauricio was saying this is a real pandemic. This is a real science fiction that somebody a really bad writer concocted for us, a really bad evil demiurge was thinking. And I think that you're right, but also I will say, well, but wait, maybe this guy is like a Stephen King, and we're just in page 300 of a 975 pages book. So who knows what the hell is coming? So I don't know if this sensation that we have been living, like Mark said, is not only the pandemic, it's everything that's going with it. I mean, the colossal political crisis, the whole process of the electoral process with a character as Trump, turning everything into these buffonesque, I don't know, like grotesque field of everything saturated, every emotion, every thought. There's nothing that happens in isolation. We don't have time to think of anything. The obscene, in every sense, has invaded the scene, right? Everything that was supposed to be kept outside for many reasons, it's now inside, and it's colonializing our minds. For me, one of the most important phrases was when Ballard talked about the real horror as this suburb of the spirit, right? This place where nothing happens, when forever you're gonna be in this stagnation of the intellect. And what happened was as the kind of the opposite. We are not in the suburb of the spirit, we are in the slums of the spirit, where everything is happening on top of us, and we don't have anywhere to go run, because if we go even to the bathroom, the grandmother and the sister and the cousins are already there. We don't have anywhere to go. We have been taken. Everything has been taken over. And another little thing that I would like to add is, Mauricio, for you and I also, we talk about the COVID thing as this break, at this point that separates, and after COVID, before COVID and after COVID time, and it's a cyclical thing, because if there is any certainty in life, is that germs are there to get us. I mean, they have just given us some chance. I mean, they just gave us a little bit of leeway. Like, okay, I'm gonna give you 100 years. Let's see what you can do in these 100 years. Let's see if humanity can think about what's coming to get you. And of course, we were so disregarding of the threat that we didn't prepare anything, with the exception of the Vietnamese, the Taiwanese, and the North Korean, and some other people who said, okay, this is serious. Even the Africans, most of the African sub-Saharans, they understood, okay, this is serious. We're not gonna fuck around with the masks or with the distancing. And but for the rest of the world, well, we are just paying our dues.
Well, that is absolutely fascinating, Naief, and please claim your airtime. I don't want to cut you off. I feel that both of us have hogged the spotlight entirely too much. But you inspired several thoughts in me. One of them is when you talk about the virus, we're thinking our way in this conversation toward, among many other things, the particular trajectory this part of the conversation has taken is the notion of science fiction, SF, as an explanatory narrative that is the best epistemological fit for our moment, and perhaps even ontological fit. What Ballard, who is quickly becoming a spectral presence in this conversation, the fourth discussant, what he would call myths of the next 5 minutes. And Ballard would probably point out that the virus itself is science fictional in the way that all viruses are science fictional. That is to say that COVID is a non-human life form, and it's kind of thumbing its nose at the Anthropocene. It seems to resonate with this sort of decentered, post-human or non-human philosophies that are getting traction these days, like object-oriented ontology, panpsychism, and the Lovecraftian cosmic pessimism of Eugene Thacker. And he's thoughtful on the point that in Lovecraft's cosmos, the gods are not so much malign as indifferent. In fact, S.T. Joshi, the Lovecraft biographer, says that Lovecraft's philosophy is rightly termed indifferentism. It's an implacable cosmos whose frame of reference is so orthogonal, so utterly apart from ours, that it barely takes notice of us. And that I was struck by the fact that viruses are uncanny things in the true Freudian sense of the word. I mean, Freud, in his essay on the uncanny, talks about cadavers, waxworks, as things that hover between taxonomies. They hover between epistemic categories, thing and person, alive or dead. They disrupt those philosophical binaries, those hierarchical dualisms, in a way that destabilizes them and is very unsettling for Western epistemology or ontology. And I believe viruses do the same thing in the sense that they hover between life form and biological machine. And there's a lot of debate in the scientific world about whether they're a form of life or they're quote unquote organisms at the edge of life or self-assembling organic molecules. And also the bizarre way in which these, I believe they're called, I believe COVID is what Mike Davis in his book Monster at the Door calls a zoonos, which is a self-replicating machine that leaps the species barrier, right? So COVID went from bats to pangolins to humans. You cannot make this stuff up. I mean, this is far better than the best John Wyndham disaster novel. So does either of you have any thoughts on the virus itself as always already science fictional?
I was thinking that, well, as Naief just said, actually viruses have been living with us in this planet way before us humans started walking this scorched earth. And they were before us. They were here before us. So it's like they are saying now, you guys move over because we were here before you. We were going to be after you. We were going to outlive you. So this is just another small taste of our power and of our presence in this planet. And then I started thinking about that many viruses the funny thing about, for example, technology is how we started talking about viruses relating to technology, right? We're afraid, we're installing antiviruses in our computers, afraid that those viruses can, endanger our information or work in the computer. So we have been living, but we haven't acknowledged that fully, I think, with viruses for the whole of our lives since we are born.
Right.
Then we started thinking that technology could grant us like some kind of power over many things, and that's not true. That's not true because also in technology we're exposed to viruses and strange pandemics, strange invisible pandemics that are lurking in the World Wide Web.
Right.
So let me just give an example of my interest in pandemics. About 8 years ago, my God, 8 years ago, yeah, I wrote a novel that was part of a more of a bigger narrative project that I started writing on Twitter.
And the title was?
The title was the Man in Tweed. It's the project that I started writing on Twitter. The narrative project that I'm talking about was called the Man in Tweed. And in any case, the novel or the narrative project is divided in 4 parts. I haven't written yet the 4th and last part, but the 3rd part is what I'm going to talk about, because that 3rd part is about a pandemic of beauty in what I like to call a simultaneous Venice, because it's not the Venice that we know, or it is, but also is the Venice of the Middle Ages, of the Renaissance, and maybe a futuristic Venice. So it's a Venice that where many times many times conflate or get together in that Venice. And I started thinking, well, we always think of pandemics of being relate pandemics or link them with ugliness, with putrefaction, with death, of course, etc. And then I started asking myself, well, what will become of us humans if a pandemic gave us beauty instead of ugliness?
Mhm.
So I started thinking about this pandemic that starts as a kind of Stendhal's syndrome that becomes physical or physiological, and starts with a woman watching a work of art in one of Venice's many museums, and she gets infected with beauty. And then she starts spreading beauty all over Venice, and all the infected look actually quite beautiful because they start transforming into different characters of different works of art. So all Venice is like plagued with this beauty pandemic, but also plagued with beautiful dead bodies. So it was, in any case, I imagined that, as I said, 8 years ago, in 2012, and then when the COVID-19 pandemic started, and we started seeing all these strangely beautiful images of almost Ballardian vacant cities from all over the world, where nature started started taking its territory again. And then some of the images some of the photographs taken in this vacant, deserted Venice that I saw last year actually were images that I started to imagine 8 years ago. Like what will Venice, like this Disney life of the Adriatic, look like when it's all deserted, when it's all vacant, when it's all empty? So in any case, I guess what I'm trying to do here is not to promote my work, but But
Although we don't frown on product placement, Maurice.
no, I'm trying to say
better bookstores everywhere.
Okay. Maybe what I'm trying to say is that the writer always has maybe shorter antenna to somehow capture the like radio waves that are, you know, in the atmosphere, so to speak. And the thing is, well, for me was uncanny, just as you were saying a few minutes ago about the uncanniness of our world, how the familiar is turning into something absolutely sinister and macabre. And that was for me writing this novel about the pandemic of beauty, of turning a city that I really love, that I have been there, and turned it into something sinister, but also something beautifully sinister or macabrely beautiful, as you will say, as you can see it.
That is absolutely enthralling. That's deep and rich and stirs up so much sediment in the riverbed of my mind. There are 1,000 things I could say, but I want dear Naief to have his time at the microphone. And so just to hark back to the question I asked that precipitated this extraordinary response from Mauricio, just in case it got lost, Naief, I was curious to know if it's at all generative for you to think about the virus as the non-human phylum's sharp rebuke to the Anthropocene, you know, and the virus as either a machine life form, as Manuel de Landa says in War in the Age of Intelligent Machines, borrowing from Deleuze, the machinic phylum, right? Machines considered as a sort of a Linnaean taxonomy, or if not using the machinic metaphor, a sort of a virulent, malevolent, implacable life form that is, you know, John Carpenter's The Thing. It's out to get us. It's got our number, and the age of man, in the sense of anthropos, humankind, is well and truly over. And this thing, this black ooze, this creature whose only desire is to replicate and colonize hosts so that it can make more of itself, like Agent Smith in the Burly Brawl in the Matrix Reloaded. I'm simply curious to know, given your broad and vastly deep knowledge of SF, of film, and of speculative literature more generally, if any of this sparks associative trails in your mind.
Oh, definitely. You know, for me, it's very, very interesting, and absolutely, I think it's a beast of science fiction. It's a monstrosity that really evades the characterizations, the usual way we stigmatize the uncanny, as you said. I think that's a very good way to refer to it. I mean, this thing, as you mentioned, is neither alive neither dead. It's so small that it's not even a bacteria. It can ride into a bacteria, into very high organisms. It can go into anything and transform whatever it touches. I mean, it's a perfect metaphoric monster. You know, if we think that the basic idea of horror is the destruction of the body, or the decomposition of the body, or the transformation of the body, well, this is the perfect machine to do so. It's such a beautiful thing, and such an atrocious thing at the same time. Such a simple thing, and we can say, well, it's just some freaking DNA that has this properties, and it's just another machine, right? But then you see that these machines are also very unpredictable. When you see the history of other pandemics, how the influenza, right? For example, and at a time where nobody really knew what the virus was. Virus was a recently discovered thing at that point. Most of the people had no idea. They still thought it was, okay, a microorganism like a bacteria, but not, they couldn't understand the complexity and the simplicity of something that is just a strand of DNA or a collection of strands of DNA with, in our case with the coronavirus, armed with spikes to be able to enter the fortress of the body, to grip and shred. It's such a fantastic thing and so incomprehensible. I mean, many of the times when you have viral disease, I mean, they attack and suddenly either they disappear magically, as Trump predicted, or in our case, we have no idea what's going to happen. I mean, sometimes I think, well, we're doing well with the vaccine, and that's a very, very fantastic progress in technology, how fast they managed to create not one, but a bunch of vaccines, that they fortify each other in the sense that the technology of one proves that the other technology is good. I mean, that they are on good scientific grounds, which I don't think that has ever happened in life. This is amazing. We have science at its best, and still very unprepared and unarmed to face this monstrosity. And I am always thrilled when I think of this thing, which kills some, but not that many. And many of the anti-pandemic people, the people who don't believe that the pandemic exists, they say, oh, it only kills the what, 0.2%, 0.1%, whatever. And you say, yeah, that still makes a lot of people that shouldn't be dying.
Well, if your father or mother or brother or wife, or husband is within that 2%,
then
it suddenly becomes very concerning. Or
exactly.
if you're the one on the ventilator,
yes,
then
it's
and dying, behind glass while your family presses its noses against it, waving their last. It suddenly becomes a rather more pressing question.
Exactly. And that's the thing. And what it's amazing is that this thing, who has no mind, has a mind of its own, because it has a strategy. It develops all these mutations. I mean, you can say, of course, it's biology, simple biology. Well, if we go to that extent, we can say that human beings do a lot of things for simple biology. So we might have to extend the idea of strategy, of critical thinking to our brothers and sisters in the virus world.
But let's move now to the political question. I mean, this is an age ruled by memes. It's ruled by viruses. And the author's name eludes me, but the marvelous book, Kill All Normies, about the rise of the alt-right, talks about the weaponization of irony and the use of memes as a highly effective sociopathological way of spreading viruses of the mind. And Trump is a creature of 4chan and 8chan, although he's surely never been on either, but they embraced him instantly. They were in ecstasies the night he was elected, and they said it better than any. We have elected a troll in chief. And now memes are part of mainstream political discourse, the memification, if you will, of the way that the cultural conversation is conducted is irreversible in America. And I'm curious to know, is there a Mexican correlative to this?
For me, the meme was a very strange apparition. When I first heard about the meme, the Dawkins idea of this cultural, self-replicating, contagious kind of idea that goes around and spreads all over, I thought it was a really fantastic thing, a really enriching way to grab what was going on in culture with a minimal effort. And And then things took a very different course, as we have seen with everything else in the internet. We have a phenomena, we expect something, and something completely different happens. This has been the norm. So basically, when I speak now about memes, especially with my kids who are in their 20s, their immediate response is, you don't know nothing about memes. You have no idea what you're talking about. You're completely ignorant. You try to rationalize, and you're falling completely behind. You cannot grab the importance, intensity, the significance for our generation of a meme. And I believe they might be right. I think that the idea of the meme, yes, it's a very contagious way of spreading things, that they're easily imitated. But also, I think that for us, especially me, I'm very, very old. I was very young when the pandemic started, and now I am really, really old. I can't grab of all the potential. For example, let me try to. I'm going to evade the discussion about Mexican politics for a little while and just go into the 90s. And Mark, and I'm sure Mauricio too. You must remember when we had this boom of optimism. I mean, and it was very present in the publications that we despise but we follow religiously, like Wired. Wired magazine.
And also Model 2000 in its own way was very cybertopian, very,
yes,
very,
exactly.
very Rebecca of Sunnybrook form, very Pollyanna-ish.
Yeah, I remember very, very vividly, and I still have it. Too bad I didn't get it out of my collection. There was this issue of Wired saying, everything is gonna be so great, so deal with it. That was the basic idea. We are gonna be so fucking rich and so fucking happy. You have no idea how great this is gonna be. This was completely Trumpian before Trump.
Yeah, the winning will never end.
It will never end because
you can't stand it.
Because we just stroke this mind, this vein of a mind that it keeps on giving without us giving anything, because that was the model of the cyber culture, right? You don't have to pay for anything anymore. People are going to provide all the culture you need for nothing. And that started generating all these memes and all these elements that became part of our culture that now we assume are real. And then by the 2001, I will say, everything started going downhill. And now we are living into this other side of the catastrophe, right? Now everything is so negative. I mean, we have really to be very brave to stand up to get up out of the bed every morning, because everything is messed up.
Yeah.
We destroyed everything. I mean, the pandemic, if we see it clearly, the pandemic is nothing compared with what's coming with global warming in a very near future. This is just giving us an idea of, you want to be confined. Well, you're gonna have to be confined, because there's not gonna be any way that you're gonna be outside, because first of all, there's gonna be nothing outside other than, I don't know, zombies eating brains, or I don't know, predators or whatever, and nothing to buy, nothing to do. Now that we have been forced into this confinement, it's very interesting to see, and to see how the media, the social media, has been cutting with it. I mean, in one way, it's been saving us from craziness. I mean, we've been already in since March, so we have been dealing with these atrocities because we have these screens, because we have something to entertain us, to make us think that, yeah, this is a funny element, this is a cultural element, but the reality is that it's very, very worrisome. I at one point, I remember we were talking, Mauricio and I, about these things, and that's when I said, nothing's gonna be the same ever. It was a very traumatic moment. So part of this never is gonna be the same is this simplification that I was making fun at the beginning of when I was speaking. Everything is gonna be simplified, divided until getting to the minimum denominator. And the meme is that. The meme is that thing that simplifies, that cuts all the richness of the conversation and turns it into a funny image with some crazy texts, which in many ways, Mark, as you know much better than me, it comes in a way from Dada, goes through the surrealists, and then it turns it into this malevolent being that's that's taking over our culture. And just to finish very quickly, to go back to your question about this, where are the QAnons in Mexico and everywhere else? I think they are there. They're growing. They're simmering. They are growing tentacles everywhere. For me, since I heard the first time about the QAnon a while ago, I was fascinated. Another thing, I speak to this about with my daughter, who is in her 20s, and for her, this is like the most boring and unproductive way of thinking. She's like, why do you even devote your time to this? Because they are so easily grasped. Everything that they say is in bold, huge Trumpian letters. There is no mystery, there's no magic, there is no enchantment. Even, Mark, remember when we used to have these fanzines, and we will go to St. Mark's, or in Paris we will go to the Quartier Latin to get these underground magazines that they divulge all this crazy stuff about sects and cults and all the underworld, right? There was this underworld which was terrifying, fascinating, and everything. And now nothing of that sort exists. We have the QAnon, which you can dissect in 15 minutes in a couple of websites, and that's about it. The magic of their cult is so superficial, so boring, but at the same time is very threatening and very real, and spreads. I mean, I was seeing these manifestations, these demonstrations, of QAnon people in Austria, in Vienna. And you say, how did they got into this thing of believing Trump is some kind of deity, godlike figure that's going to protect us from the pedophiles and the cannibals from Hollywood? And it's a very interesting way of seeding to the less interesting, to the less educated, to the more ignorant, and there is there's no vaccine for that. I see it spreading, I see it growing, and I mean, what happened in the January 6th with the assault or the storm, to follow their wording, of the Capitol, was just a prologue. I am very afraid, not because the real violence is going to come, but because this is going to become us. This is going to become what we are, what we have to deal with. The stupidity of the Bush years, of the Reagan years, is going to look like Olympic, like magnificent.
What is the place of the artist, both in the landscape of social media? Mauricio, as someone who attempted to write a Twitter novel, I would be curious to know how one writes a Twitter novel, what inspired the very idea of a Twitter novel, and whether, and this is utterly unrelated to the first part of the question, whether both of you anathematize social media to the extent that I do, even though I'm on all of these platforms. But they are social leprosy to me. They make my skin creep. And I look at myself in the epistemological mirror of these platforms, and I'm unrecognizable to myself. I don't like what I see. It's Seth Brundle in The Fly, gazing into the bathroom mirror and staggering back at the horror he beholds. So whichever of you wants to dive in first.
So I ran away from Facebook, but I must say that in every social media platform that I have been in, I have written literary projects. For me, social media was and still is, I'm only right now on Instagram, for me has been they are like notebooks.
But
yeah,
but may I interrupt, Mauricio? Even though
yeah.
you're writing in public, because that always seems um, like this Renaissance anatomical textbook image of the flayed man, right? The decorticated man, often depicted as the Saint Bartholomew, I think it was. I mean, you
Hmm.
guys come from
Hmm.
Catholic culture, you would know better than this old atheist. But the saint who was flayed alive and is often depicted in 15th century woodcuts, jauntily throwing his skin over his shoulder, as I always like to think, as Frank Sinatra with his raincoat on the cover of Songs for Swinging Young Lovers.
Yeah.
but the point is that if you're writing in public, isn't that like someone sitting down at a typewriter in the middle of a sports arena filled with football fans? I mean, how can you do it?
Well, because for me, it sounds, I know, contradictory what I'm going to say, but for me, I have found um, an enormous freedom and liberty on social media until now for writing my literary projects. Because as I said, I know that there are public, as I said, like a public arena for exposing your work. But in any case, for me, I mean, I really, truly don't give a shit about what people think about what I write on or don't write on social media. For me, it's an experiment, has been an experiment of, yeah, like opening, so to speak, my studio, my writing laboratory to the public to see.
How do you keep the story in your head if you're writing tweet by tweet? I mean, I noticed, I couldn't help but notice in your biography, you said that you were working on, forgive my abysmal Spanish pronunciation, El Hombre de Tweed,
Yeah.
um, for something like 5 years. And it occurred to me, of course it was that, because you're writing 140 character installations. How did you hold all of that in your head?
As I said, I left Facebook and then got on this black hole they call Twitter, and I was there for about, I stayed there for about 9 years, not only seven. I wish I would. There was only 7 years. I was there for 9 whole years of my life. I spent 9 whole years of my life on this black, in this black hole. So for me at the start it was very easy. As I said, I'm talking about paradoxes and contradictions. But for me, the one at the start, let us remember that it started as a, on Twitter. I mean, 140 character limit. Then it's doubled to 280 character, and I think that's the limit nowadays.
Mm.
So I found, as I said, I found an enormous freedom in constraints. I really like to think that these small 140 character cages of writing provided enormous creative freedom. At least that was for me.
It's very Oulipo. It's very like the French
That's it.
literature potentielle
Yeah.
movement that constrains itself by saying write a novel without using vowels, or write a novel in which every sentence begins with a, or whatever it may be. It's these arbitrary constraints that turn out to be what the cognitive philosopher Daniel Dennett calls inspiration pumps.
Yeah, yeah. For me it was, as I said, very, very easy. And you asked how I managed to get it, to get in my head the whole idea, to not lose the thread or the narrative thread of the story. So as I said at the start of our conversation, the Man in Tweed narrative project comprises of 3 parts, right? Right now, of 3 parts. I'm planning to write a fourth and last part, not on Twitter anymore. But the 3 first parts of this project, I wrote them on Twitter. And the first one, it was a whole Oulipo experiment, because I wrote that first part directly on real time on Twitter. So I started every day for a month, because that took a month of my life, of my writing life. And every day I started with an idea of to continue the last part, the last chapter I wrote the day before, and then I started, like, going with the flow of the story, almost like yeah, like a surrealist thing. For me, it was,
Automatic writing.
yeah, like automatic, but never, or trying not to lose the narrative thread of what I was writing. And then that was the first part that I wrote in a whole month on real time from Monday to Sunday, never missing a day. It was like a discipline for me. And then when I realized that I had a novel, that I had a bigger project in my hands, then I started writing first on a Word document, and then started like doing the cut and paste on Twitter, but never losing the idea of writing 140 character installments.
Mm.
That was the challenge for me, of writing like these small chapters of 140 characters. So
Wow.
for me, it was really fun. I know it sounds obsessive. It was. I am obsessive. It sounds neurotic also. I am a neurotic, so it was a neurotic project. And but it was also a lot of fun. I had a lot of fun writing this project. I will never do something like this again, because that was this project on Twitter. Now I ran away from I escaped from what I called shitter, not Twitter, because it has turned into a global shitter, and took refuge on Instagram. And there I'm writing another couple of literary projects that I hope that someday will be published, that spark the interest of some publisher in the maybe near future.
So we have to wrap up now, and I want to return us to the very beginning. And we began with the Ballard phrase, we all live inside an enormous novel. And so let me quickly ask each of you, very briefly, what novel or movie best resonates with our moment for you, provides the best explanatory narrative, which, whether it's a work of speculative fiction or a work of Gothic fiction or a film or a TV series, which myth of the next 5 minutes shines a light around the bend to whatever lies ahead, for good or ill, or is most closely mapped onto the topos of our moment? Is it a work from the past, like The Man in the High Castle by Philip K. Dick, a classic like 1984 by Orwell, The Road by Cormac McCarthy, a disaster novel like The Drowned World or The Drought by Ballard, Mautu or White Noise by DeLillo, maybe Kim Stanley Robinson's Cli-Fi, Lovecraft's Racist Gothic, the TV series The Walking Dead, or films like I'm Thinking of Ending Things, or the marvelous sort of black Gothic of noir of Us. Just whatever for you maps most closely onto our moment.
It's very hard to say. I think of The Drowned World by Ballard. I think of oh boy, the one with the skyscraper of Ballard's High Rise.
High Rise.
I think about High Rise, about like those things that socially he portrays so well. I think about Running Wild, also by Ballard, the one about the suburb, well, not the suburb, the gated community,
yeah,
where they steal the children. I think that those give me a lot of elements that I can grab to understand the moment we're living. And also the movie Perfect Sense by David Mackenzie, 2011, which I think is a marvelous piece and a completely neglected masterpiece. I think it reflects all our anxieties about the pandemic and where it's really taking us.
For me, I have two novels that I read in the past year. The first one is the newest novel by Don DeLillo, The Silence, that tells in no more than 100 pages the possibility of an technological apocalypse, where all devices stop working altogether. and there are two couples that are in the novel that face this technological apocalypse that starts on an airplane. And for me, it's one of the most extraordinary proofs, not only of one of the greatest writers alive, that's Don DeLillo, but also of the possibilities of the future for us authors of fiction. And the other one is a novel that I just read, I finished reading yesterday, and it's a novel by an Italian author that wasn't published during his lifetime. He actually, this novel called Dissipatio HG, it has a really strange Latin title. It's like Dissipations of All Humankind, of all human genre. Yeah. It's like Dissipatio Humanis Generis. And it was published posthumously in 1977, but it was the seventh novel by Guido Morselli, that's the name of the author. And after he sent this novel to a publisher in Italy, Mondadori, and it was rejected, he committed suicide.
Oh.
Because he faced the failure of a lifetime after sending 7 novels. This was the last one, to different publishers. They didn't get interested in publishing it. And afterwards, as sometimes happens in literary life, he, Guido Morselli, I mean, became one of the most, or has become one of the most important Italian writers of the post-war years. And this novel is a post-apocalyptic novel written in 1973, the same year that Ballard published Crash, actually. And it tells the story of only one last man standing. And that's the narrator, the unnamed narrator of the novel, that tells the tale of how to survive in an empty world, or a world empty of all human beings. And it's an extraordinary novel. And I'm watching for the 4th time the first season of one of my favorite TV series, that's True Detective. That's the one set in Louisiana. And I agree, each time that I have seen this, that I have watched this series, I agree more and more with the Matthew McConaughey character, with his nihilism, with his absolute lack of faith in humankind, in human nature, and in everything. But at the end of this fantastic season, there's a small glimmer of hope after all this darkness that we have been facing through all the season. And I would like to finish this intervention by saying that yes, I'm like the Matthew McConaughey character, not by my looks, obviously, but by the way of thinking about being very pessimistic about human nature right now. But for me, there's this small glimmer of hope at the end of the tunnel.
Marvelous. What a perfect note to end on. I'd like to thank both of you gentlemen for being so inexhaustibly fascinating and reliably eloquent. I'd like to also express our collective gratitude to UNAM and our hosts at the Museo del Chopo, and to all of our Mexican listeners who I hope found this enlightening and entertaining in equal measure. Thank you so much to both of you.
Thank you very much, Mark. Thank you, Naief.
Thank you, Mauricio. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Pacho. Thank you to the Museo del Chopo for everything.